On my wedding day, as I slipped the ring on her finger, my best man shouted she'd been with him. 200 guests froze. I just laughed, thanking him. Her smile vanished. She never saw what came next. I once thought the biggest day of my life would be a dream come true. Instead, it unraveled in front of 200 people like a scene ripped straight from some twisted nightmare. Imagine standing at the altar, about to marry the woman you love, only for your best friend to drop a bombshell that shatters your entire world. What the hell would you do next? To really understand the absolute gut punch that was my wedding day, we have to rewind a bit. Because the truth is, the warning signs were flashing red long before the string quartet even tuned their instruments. I chose not to see them. My name's Nathan, I'm 29, and I grew up in a family that was, well, complicated is an understatement. My mom? She was the queen of appearances. Everything had to look perfect for the neighbors, even if it felt like a war zone behind closed doors. My dad, bless his heart, was the quiet, distant type. He worked himself to the bone, came home late, and avoided conflict like it was a contagious disease. And then there was my older sister, Emily, the golden child. Seriously, she could do no wrong in my mom's eyes. Me? I was the reliable one. The one expected to fix problems, keep the peace, and never, ever make a scene. That pressure, that expectation, it stuck to me like glue my entire life. By my 20s, I'd practically trained myself to swallow my anger, to just nod and smile when people disrespected me. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the betrayal I endured later cut so unbelievably deep. I'd spent years playing the role of the forgiving, dependable guy. When I met Hannah, I actually thought things were finally changing. She was gorgeous, charming, and she seemed to get me in ways my own family never had. She saw past the responsible Nathan and encouraged me, told me I deserved more than just carrying everyone else's burdens. It felt like a massive breath of fresh air. My parents, though? Not impressed. My mom, especially, had this subtle, infuriating way of making it clear Hannah wasn't good enough. She'd drop little grenades like, well, at least she's polite, or I suppose she's presentable. Emily, of course, joined in, constantly teasing me about how Hannah didn't fit in with our family. I tried to brush it off, telling myself they just needed time. But deep down, those words stung like hell. I wanted them to see Hannah the way I did. For once, I just wanted something in my life they couldn't mock or dismiss. My best friend since high school, Mark, was my absolute rock through all of it. He'd been by my side through college, through countless fights with my parents, even through nights where I questioned if I'd ever break free from my family's shadow. He was that friend who always knew exactly what to say. So, naturally, he was the first person I asked to be my best man. It felt right, like no matter what my family thought of Hannah, at least Mark had my back. I leaned on that comfort more than I realized. Then, a few months before the wedding, I got the first real hint that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. I'd gone over to my parents' house to help my mom with the garden. As I walked into the kitchen, I froze. I overheard her talking to Emily. He's rushing into this. Hannah is not who she pretends to be. Mark probably knows it, too. My heart hammered. Why would she bring up Mark? Emily snickered, replying, well, Nathan's always been blind. He'll figure it out the hard way. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers. But instead, I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it. I convinced myself they were just being their usual cruel selves, maybe jealous that I'd found happiness. But that feeling? It just stuck. Every time Hannah brushed off a text or came home late from work, my mom's voice replayed in my head. Every time Mark seemed a little distant, I remembered Emily's laugh. I tried to tell myself I was just paranoid, that wedding planning was stressful, that I was overthinking everything. And yet, something in my gut wouldn't let it go. The tension just built in the months leading up to the wedding. My mom made constant digs about the guest list. Why are we inviting so many of Hannah's friends? Your side will look empty. Emily outright told me I was making a mistake. Even my dad, who usually stayed silent, muttered once at dinner, marriage only works if it's built on truth. I remember gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles went white. Did they know something I didn't, or were they just trying to sabotage me like always? The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I sat in my apartment, staring at the ring I'd chosen for Hannah, simple, elegant, exactly her style, or at least what I thought was her style. I thought about years of trying to please my family, about how desperately I wanted this day to be mine, not theirs. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. It was a text from Emily. Hope you're ready for tomorrow. Some surprises aren't so fun. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen until the words blurred. The morning of the wedding, everything looked picture perfect. The venue glowed with soft lights, the flowers were immaculate, guests buzzed with excitement. My mom floated around like she owned the place, making sure everyone noticed the expensive decorations. Emily gave me a smirk as she walked by, like she knew a secret I didn't. Mark gave me a quick hug before the ceremony, his smile warm, but something felt off. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. And then came the moment. Standing at the altar, Hannah's hand in mine, my heart hammering in my chest. I was about to slip the ring onto her finger, about to seal everything I'd fought for, when Mark's voice sliced through the silence like a knife. Stop. The room froze. 200 heads turned. My best man, my brother in all but blood, stood tall, his face pale, but his voice steady. She's been sleeping with me for months. The words echoed through the hall like a gunshot. My knees nearly buckled. Guests gasped, whispers erupted. Hannah's smile, for the first time, faltered. My mom's hand flew to her chest. Emily's grin spread wide. For a moment, I thought I'd collapse under the weight of it all. But then, something strange happened. Instead of breaking, something inside me snapped free. I started to laugh. Loud, sharp, cutting through the silence. I looked at Hannah, her eyes wide with horror, and said, "Thank you for making this easier." Her face drained of color. She stammered, reaching for me, but I pulled my hand back. As the room erupted in chaos, guests murmuring, family members staring, and Mark looking like he'd both destroyed and saved me, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. For the first time, I wasn't the one scrambling to hold everything together. I wasn't the one being mocked or blindsided. I had a plan, one they didn't see coming. As Hannah's panicked smile vanished, as my mom leaned forward like a vulture hungry for drama, as Emily's smirk widened, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. That was the moment they realized they had no idea what I had prepared for them. The chaos after Mark's outburst was unforgettable. The string quartet stopped mid-note, their bows frozen. People gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. I saw my aunt clutch her pearls, my cousin reach for his phone until his wife smacked his arm. And my mother, her eyes practically gleamed. She wasn't shocked, not really. No, she looked like someone who'd been waiting for a storm to prove her right. Emily, of course, had that smug smile plastered across her face, the kind that screamed, "See? We told you so." Hannah tugged on my sleeve, her voice shaking. "Nathan, please, let me explain." Explain? With 200 people staring? My laugh must have sounded cruel, because she flinched, but I didn't care. For once, I wasn't the one left stammering. Mark stood frozen, guilt written all over him, but he still held his ground. That was the kind of friend he'd been to me, loyal until loyalty became inconvenient. The officiant nervously cleared his throat. Perhaps we should step outside, give everyone a moment. I didn't move. Neither did Hannah. The silence stretched until my mother's voice cut through like a knife. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "at least it happened now, before Nathan wasted any more of his life." She turned to Emily, who nodded like they'd rehearsed the line. A few relatives chuckled nervously, as if Mom had given them permission to laugh. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just Hannah's betrayal. It was their opportunity. My family had been waiting for this, like vultures circling above me. And now that the carcass was out in the open, they were diving in. I stepped back, handed the microphone to the officiant, and simply said, "The ceremony is over." I walked down the aisle without looking at Hannah, without glancing at Mark. People parted like the Red Sea, some whispering, some patting my shoulder, others shaking their heads. Behind me, I heard my mother sigh dramatically. Always so theatrical. The reception was supposed to be the happiest party of my life. Instead, it turned into something closer to a wake. Guests left in clusters, murmuring. The DJ tried to lighten the mood, playing soft background music as if that could erase what had just happened. Hannah locked herself in the bridal suite with 2 of her bridesmaids, and Mark disappeared, probably ashamed, or maybe just avoiding me. But my family? They stayed. They lingered like smoke after a fire. My mother moved through the crowd as if she owned the venue, consoling people on what poor Nathan has endured, while at the same time tossing lines like, "Well, at least he's free now." Or, "Better we know what kind of woman she is before children got involved." Emily sat at a table with her friends, laughing, sipping champagne like it was her party. Every time our eyes met, she raised her glass with a smirk. I sat alone at a table in the corner, staring at the ring still in my pocket. My dad approached me quietly, setting a hand on my shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice low, "sometimes the hardest truths come at the right time." I wanted comfort, some kind of fatherly reassurance. But then he added, "Your mother was right about Hannah all along." And that was when I understood. Even here, in my lowest moment, they couldn't resist twisting the knife, reminding me that they'd won. That night, after the last guest had trickled out, I drove home to my empty apartment. The silence was suffocating. I stared at the wedding photos still framed on the wall from the rehearsal dinner, the gifts piled in the corner, waiting to be unwrapped. My phone buzzed constantly, half with messages of sympathy from friends, half with snide little comments from Emily. "Told you so. Maybe next time listen to your family." One text even read, "You should thank Mark for saving you." I turned my phone face down on the counter and poured myself a glass of water, trying to steady my thoughts. The betrayal stung like an open wound. But what made it worse was the way my family relished it. They didn't see my pain. They saw an opportunity to reinforce their narrative. Nathan, the gullible one. Nathan, the failure. Nathan, the one who couldn't make it work. Over the next few weeks, that narrative grew sharper. My mom told every relative within earshot how lucky I was to be spared. At family dinners, Emily made sly jokes about me, dodging a bullet. Dad said little, but his silence was just as condemning. I couldn't escape it. Every holiday, every birthday, it came up in some way. "Remember when Nathan almost married her?" They'd laugh. Even distant cousins started bringing it up like it was family lore. And then the manipulation began. My mom started introducing me to better options. She invited her friend's daughter to dinner one night, making sure to gush about how accomplished she was. Emily cornered me at a barbecue, suggesting I aim higher this time. Even my dad, who barely spoke, made a comment about how I should listen to the family more. It was like they decided my personal life was theirs to control, now that they'd proven me wrong. I tried to ignore it. I tried to bury myself in work, telling myself time would heal things. But the more I pushed forward, the harder they pulled me back. Emily once told me flat out, "You should be grateful Mark said something. Without him, you'd be raising kids with a liar right now." My mom added, "That boy is more like a son to me than you ever were. He saved you." That sentence. More like a son than me. My own mother. It broke something inside me. It became clear they weren't just reveling in my humiliation. They were rewriting the story to erase my pain and elevate themselves. I wasn't the betrayed groom in their eyes. I was the foolish child who needed their guidance. The one who should learn his lesson and bow to their wisdom. And Mark? He wasn't the betrayer. He was the hero in their twisted retelling. The worst part? Hannah tried to reach out. She sent letters, emails, messages begging me to meet her, to talk. My family intercepted them when they could, even going so far as to block her number on my mother's phone plan, a plan I was still technically under. "You don't need her poison," my mom said. "We'll protect you from making more mistakes." But I wasn't sure who the poison really was anymore. Because as the weeks stretched into months, one thought kept eating at me. If they were so quick to side with Mark, so quick to paint him as my savior, then maybe this betrayal wasn't a shock to them at all. Maybe they'd known. Maybe they'd even encouraged it. And if that was true, then this wasn't just about a failed wedding. This was about years of control, manipulation, and favoritism finally reaching its ugliest point. That's when the first seed of revenge planted itself in my mind. A few months after the disaster at the wedding, life had fallen into an eerie rhythm. I went to work, came home, avoided family calls when I could, but every family event was still a minefield. They never let me forget. Emily would drop her snide one-liners like breadcrumbs, and Mom seemed to thrive on telling everyone how lucky I was that my best man exposed Hannah's betrayal. I didn't argue anymore. I just sat there nodding, waiting for the day to end. Then came my father's birthday dinner. The night everything shifted. It was one of those forced family gatherings at Emily's house, a 2-story place she loved to show off like it was a mansion. She'd just bought new furniture, and she made sure everyone knew the exact price of each piece. I almost didn't go, but Mom guilt-tripped me with her classic line, "If you really cared about this family, you'd be here." So I showed up quietly, gift in hand, ready to survive a few hours. Dinner started as usual, with Emily bragging about her promotion and Mom chiming in about how proud she was. Dad gave me a curt nod, already sipping his whiskey. For the first half hour, it was tolerable. Then Emily leaned across the table, a sly grin on her face, and said, "So, Nathan, have you talked to Mark lately?" My fork froze midair. Everyone at the table turned to me, waiting. I forced a calm tone. No, haven't had a reason to. Mom chuckled, shaking her head. You should. He misses you. And honestly, after what he did for you, you owe him. My jaw tightened. What he did for me. Emily smirked, sipping her wine. He saved you from the biggest mistake of your life. And now he's happier than ever. You know, you should be glad for him. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, happier than ever? I asked slowly. Mom exchanged a glance with Emily, then leaned back in her chair as if she'd been waiting to say it. Well, since you and Hannah ended, they've gotten serious. Very serious. My breath caught. He moved in with her last month. The room spun. I could barely process what I'd heard. Hannah, my ex-fiancé. Mark, my best friend. Living together. My chest tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. Emily's grin widened. They make a good couple. Honestly, you can tell it's real. Way better match than you two ever were. And then my mother, without a hint of hesitation, added, we've even had them over for dinner a few times. Lovely evenings. They fit right in with the family like he was meant to be here all along. The knife twisted deeper. My own family, sitting around the same table, sharing meals, laughing with the two people who had humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. Not only had they accepted it, they embraced it. I stared at my father, hoping for some kind of defense, some pushback. He just swirled his glass and muttered, it is what it is. The room blurred. My heart pounded in my ears. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand how they could betray me like this. But I didn't. I just sat there, silent, while they continued their meal like it was the most normal thing in the world. Later that night, when I drove home, my hands shook on the wheel. I kept replaying my mom's voice. They fit right in with the family. The words carved themselves into my mind. It wasn't just that Hannah and Mark had betrayed me. It wasn't even just that my family had known. It was that they chose them over me without hesitation, without guilt. They had made it clear. In their eyes, I was expendable. That was the night I stopped trying to win their approval. The night something inside me hardened. The night I realized I had been blind for years, thinking family meant loyalty, thinking friendship meant trust. And that was the night I promised myself, quietly, bitterly, that this wasn't over. After that dinner, I went into a kind of autopilot. Days blurred together. I'd get up, drag myself to work, sit through meetings without absorbing anything, and come home to silence. My apartment felt colder than ever, like every wall was whispering reminders of what I had lost. I'd walk past the unopened wedding gifts shoved into a corner, each box a monument to humiliation. Sometimes I thought about throwing them all out, but I couldn't bring myself to. They weren't just gifts anymore. They were proof of what I had endured. The betrayal had left me hollow. I couldn't sleep without replaying that moment at the altar, Mark's voice echoing in my head. I couldn't scroll through my phone without stumbling on old photos of me and Hannah, smiling, happy, unaware of what was happening behind my back. But worse than all of that was the knowledge that my family had chosen them, that they'd opened their arms to Hannah and Mark, welcomed them into dinners, laughed with them like nothing was wrong. I stopped answering calls. When my mom left voicemails, they were full of passive-aggressive concern. Nathan, you can't isolate yourself forever. You need to move on. We're all very happy for Mark and Hannah. You should be too. It's time to grow up. My sister's messages were sharper. You're being dramatic. They're in love and you're bitter. That's why you'll always be alone. I stopped going to family gatherings entirely. At first, they tried to guilt me into showing up. It's Dad's birthday. It's Thanksgiving. We're having a little dinner. Everyone will be there. But I refused. And the more I refused, the easier it became to cut them out, piece by piece. Still, the absence hurt. I'd scroll through social media and see pictures of them smiling at Emily's house, Mark's arm around Hannah, my mom at the center of the table like a queen surrounded by her chosen subjects. I'd feel the sting of being erased, replaced, forgotten. The worst was Christmas. That was the holiday that always mattered most to me. As a kid, it was the one time my dad would put work aside, when my mom would bake cookies and insist we all sit together. I didn't go that year. Instead, I stayed in my apartment, watching the snow fall outside, my only company the faint hum of the radiator. Around midnight, I saw Emily's post, her living room lit up, the family gathered, Hannah and Mark sitting front and center. The caption read, "Family is everything." That broke me. I sat there staring at my phone until tears blurred the screen. For years, I had bent over backwards to keep the family together, to be the one who kept peace, who sacrificed my pride just to belong. And now, I wasn't even a footnote. I wasn't invited, wasn't wanted, wasn't even acknowledged. They had written me out completely. I sank deeper into myself after that. I'd show up to work, but avoid eye contact. Friends invited me out, but I always made excuses. My apartment became my cocoon, a place where no one could hurt me further, but also where I slowly withered. Depression crept in like a fog, heavy and unshakable. And yet, somewhere in the quiet, something began to shift. Maybe it was the sheer weight of the pain. Maybe it was survival instinct. But I started to think differently. Instead of wondering why this had happened to me, I started asking myself what I was going to do about it. I began journaling, scribbling down every slight, every betrayal, every manipulative comment my mother had ever said. I wrote about Emily's smirks, about my dad's silence, about the way they made me feel invisible. I wrote about Mark and Hannah, the lies, the dinners, the way they paraded their betrayal in front of me like a prize. Page after page, I let the venom pour out of me. And then slowly, I started to plan. At first, it wasn't much, just small steps to take back control. I cut off the last financial ties. To my parents. I'd still been on my mom's phone plan, but I switched carriers. I changed my bank accounts, moved them out of the branch my dad always used. I started saying no, even to small things. And with every little act of separation, I felt a flicker of strength. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because the truth was, walking away wasn't going to silence them. As long as they had their version of the story, Nathan, the fool who got saved by his best man, they would never stop. They would keep mocking me, keep rewriting the past to make themselves the heroes. And that was when my thoughts began to darken. If I wanted peace, real peace, I couldn't just walk away. I had to take back the narrative. I had to show them that I wasn't the naive, gullible child they thought I was. I had to make them regret underestimating me. The seed of revenge, once small, began to take root. It started small, almost imperceptible, like the first crack of light seeping under a heavy door. After months of isolation and bitterness, I made a decision. If my family had written me off as the gullible failure, then I was going to build a life so undeniable that they couldn't ignore me anymore. I wasn't going to argue with them or beg them to see me differently. I was going to rise so high above their reach that their words wouldn't matter. Work became my anchor. I'd been a project manager at a mid-sized firm for years, coasting along, never really pushing beyond what was comfortable. But now I poured myself into it. I was the first one in, last one out. I took on the projects nobody else wanted, the messy, complicated ones that looked impossible. At first, my coworkers looked at me like I was insane. But slowly that changed. My bosses started noticing. By the end of the quarter, I'd earned a promotion, one that doubled my responsibilities and, more importantly, my salary. It wasn't just the money, though. It was the confidence that came with it. For so long, I believed the lies my family fed me. That I wasn't sharp enough, bold enough, worthy enough. Every late night, every successful project, every compliment from my team chipped away at that poison until I started to believe something new. I was capable. I was strong. I wasn't defined by them. With the extra income, I finally moved out of the cramped apartment that had become a mausoleum of broken dreams. I bought a condo downtown, not huge, but sleek, modern, and mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city lights. I remember standing there the first night, glass of wine in hand, thinking, this is the first space in my life untouched by them. No memories of Emily's smug laughter. No echoes of my mom's criticism. No shadow of Hannah and Mark. Just me. I didn't stop there. I'd always been careful with money, but now I became strategic. I invested, learned the markets, read every book and article I could find. What started as dabbling turned into serious growth. Within a year, my accounts had multiplied in ways I never imagined. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something real. Meanwhile, my body was changing too. Rock bottom had left me gaunt. Shadows under my eyes, shoulders hunched with invisible weight. But I forced myself to the gym, even when I didn't want to. At first, I could barely lift anything. But the discipline I had honed at work carried over. 1 month turned into 3, 3 into 6, and soon I didn't recognize the man in the mirror. The softness faded, replaced by muscle and definition. My posture straightened, my energy surged. People at work started noticing. Strangers did too. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible when I walked into a room. But the biggest change wasn't physical or financial. It was social. Slowly, I began to rebuild a circle around me. But this time, carefully. No more clinging to people who fed off my loyalty and gave nothing back. I cut ties with anyone who reminded me of the old patterns, even old friends who had been too quick to side with Mark. In their place, I built new connections, colleagues who respected me, acquaintances who became genuine friends, even mentors who saw potential in me I had never allowed myself to acknowledge. One evening at a networking event, I was introduced to a man named Richard. He was older, sharp, and carried himself with the calm authority of someone who'd built an empire from scratch. We talked for hours that night. Over the next few months, he became something I'd never really had before, a guide. He taught me about business, about strategy, about the difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. Leverage, Nathan, he said once over dinner, tapping his glass for emphasis. It's not about shouting the loudest. It's about holding the right cards and waiting for the exact moment to play them. I carried that lesson like a weapon tucked into my jacket. And as I rose higher, my family noticed. They couldn't help it. Emily sent a message out of the blue. Nice place you bought. Surprising, honestly. Mom left a voicemail dripping with false sweetness. Your sister tells me you've been doing well. Why don't you come to dinner? We miss you. Even my dad broke his silence once with a gruff, heard you're moving up. Good for you. But I didn't take the bait. Not yet. I answered politely when I had to, but I didn't re-enter their world. Let them stew. Let them wonder how the failure they mocked was suddenly outpacing them. Let them whisper. The truth was, the higher I climbed, the clearer my vision became. Every success, every brick I laid in this new life, was sharpening the contrast between who I was becoming and who they still were. And the more I grew, the more I realized something vital. I wasn't just rebuilding myself. I was gathering leverage. Because no matter how far I distanced myself, I knew my family. And I knew they couldn't stand losing control. The day would come when they'd try to pull me back in, when they'd overstep, when they'd hand me the perfect opening. And when that day came, I would be ready. The shift came almost by accident, as most important things do. By then, I'd been in my new condo for over a year. My career had skyrocketed. My investments were thriving, and I was no longer the ghost of a man who had walked out of his own wedding in humiliation. Outwardly, my life looked stable, even enviable. But inside, the embers of betrayal still burned. I hadn't forgotten what they did. I hadn't forgotten how easily they replaced me. I hadn't forgotten how my own mother had looked me in the eye and said, Mark is more like a son than you'll ever be. And then one day, leverage practically fell into my lap. It started with an email. My company was bidding for a massive contract, a project that would secure us national recognition. My role was leading the due diligence team, combing through background checks, financials, and affiliations of the businesses we'd be partnering with. I clicked through the files, scanning until a name stopped me cold, Emily's husband, Ryan. His company had submitted a proposal as a subcontractor. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through the documents. At first, I thought it was coincidence, just another file. But the deeper I dug, the more cracks I saw. Numbers that didn't line up. Projects marked as complete, but with no clear records. Inflated invoices. And then, buried in a set of financial attachments, proof of something worse. Ryan had been funneling money through shell accounts to hide tax liabilities. I sat back in my chair stunned. My sister, who had mocked me endlessly, who had flaunted her wealth at every gathering, who had smiled smugly when she told me Mark and Hannah were happy together, her husband was cooking the books. And now the evidence was in my hands. I didn't rush. Richard's voice echoed in my mind. Leverage isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about holding the right cards. So, I kept quiet, carefully copying the files, securing them where no one else could touch them. I didn't bring it up at work immediately. Instead, I flagged the inconsistencies in neutral terms, letting my team begin the process without drawing attention to myself. But I knew if the right eyes saw this, Ryan's company would be finished. That was the first card. The second came a few weeks later, in a way that felt almost poetic. A former coworker of Hannah's reached out to me. She'd left the company Hannah still worked for and was looking for connections in my firm. Over coffee, she casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, Hannah's not doing well. Ever since she and Mark moved in together, things have been rocky. Word is she's been using company funds for personal expenses, trips, shopping, even a down payment for furniture. Honestly, I'm surprised she hasn't been fired yet." I didn't show it on my face, but inside, I felt that ember flare brighter. Hannah, the woman who had humiliated me at the altar, was leaving a paper trail, too. Another card for the deck. And then, almost as if fate itself was stacking the deck in my favor, my mother reached out. Nathan, her voicemail cooed, "We'd love to see you. It's been too long. Emily's planning a family dinner. You should come." Something in her tone was different, less condescending, more coaxing. I hesitated, but I went. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to see what game they were playing. When I walked into Emily's house, I saw it immediately. The cracks. Her smile was stretched too tight. Ryan barely made eye contact. My mom fussed over me, uncharacteristically warm, asking about my work, my condo, my exciting life. Even my dad managed a half-hearted smile. And then halfway through dinner, Emily dropped the real reason I'd been invited. "So, Nathan," she began, swirling her wine glass. "We heard you've made some impressive strides lately. Investments, promotions. It must feel good." I raised an eyebrow. "It does." Ryan cleared his throat. "Frankly speaking, we were actually wondering if you'd consider partnering with us on something. A business opportunity." There it was. They needed me. I hid my satisfaction behind a polite nod. "Interesting. I'll think about it." That night, as I drove home, I realized the balance of power had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the one on the outside begging for scraps of approval. They were the ones reaching out, angling for my resources, my connections, and they had no idea I already held evidence that could dismantle them piece by piece. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just went home, opened my journal, and wrote one line in bold letters across the page. The time is coming. Because now I wasn't just the black sheep of the family. I was the wolf they had underestimated. I didn't rush. That was the hardest part. Every cell in my body wanted to walk into Emily's house the next day, drop a stack of papers on the dining room table, and watch her smirk disappear. I wanted to look Ryan in the eye and tell him I knew exactly how many phantom invoices he had signed, how many accounts he had hidden. But if there was one thing Richard had drilled into me, it was patience. A sharp knife doesn't slash wildly. It waits, then cuts clean. So I waited. I smiled politely when my mom called again, asking if I'd thought about Ryan's business proposal. I deflected when Emily sent me photos of their family dinners, Hannah sitting at the table like she'd always belonged. And I waited until they believed I was softened, until they thought I was back under their thumb. The opportunity came on its own. My firm ultimately rejected Ryan's bid, citing financial irregularities. I hadn't pushed it too hard on my end, just enough to nudge the auditors in the right direction. Ryan shrugged it off publicly, but I could tell it rattled him. A week later, he reached out personally. "Listen," he said, voice lowered, "I know we've had differences in the past, but you and I could really help each other. I've got some big clients lined up. If you could just bring in your connections, we'd both profit." I almost laughed. The same man who used to roll his eyes when Emily mocked me at the dinner table was now asking for my help like we were equals. I agreed to meet him, though not to partner, but to gather more. And he gave it willingly, bragging about deals, clients, and timelines that didn't exist, thinking I was eager to join. He didn't know I was recording every word. That was the first strike. The second came through Hannah. A few weeks later, I received an anonymous email with attachments, screenshots, invoices, expense reports, all with her name on them. Whoever sent it clearly had an axe to grind, but they didn't know what they were handing me, undeniable proof that Hannah had been siphoning company funds. I filed it away carefully, and then I orchestrated the scene. It was Emily's turn to host Easter dinner, and for the first time in years, I accepted the invitation with a smile. My mother practically squealed over the phone. "I knew you'd come around, Nathan. The family will be complete again." Complete. The word tasted bitter, but I let her believe it. I arrived that evening in a tailored suit, carrying an expensive bottle of wine. I looked every bit the success they had once said I'd never be. Emily eyed me with a flicker of envy, and Ryan plastered on his fake businessman's smile. Hannah was there, too, standing beside Mark, her hand looped through his arm like she'd claimed another piece of my life. My mother beamed, fussing over me, introducing me to their friends as if she had molded me herself. Dinner was tense, but polite until dessert. That's when I placed a small folder on the table, right between the centerpiece and Emily's untouched glass of Chardonnay. "What's this?" Emily asked, frowning. I leaned back, calm. "Something I thought you all should see." Ryan opened it first. His face drained of color as he flipped through the pages. Copies of his doctored invoices, account transfers, the shell companies he thought no one would ever uncover. Emily leaned over his shoulder, confusion giving way to horror. "What is this, Nathan?" she whispered. "Documentation," I said evenly, "of Ryan's little side business." The one that could get him barred from ever holding another contract again if the IRS doesn't get to him first. The silence was deafening. Even Mark looked uneasy, his grip on Hannah's hand tightening. "And Hannah," I added smoothly, sliding a second set of papers across the table. "Seems you've been creative with company funds. Shopping trips, vacations, even furniture. You might want to clear those receipts with your employer before someone else does." Hannah's face went white. She stammered, You can't. I haven't done anything." I cut her off. My voice low but sharp. "Not yet. But you should all understand something. I'm not the gullible fool you laughed at anymore. You don't get to humiliate me, replace me, and then come crawling back when you need my help." My mother finally found her voice. "Nathan, this is blackmail." I met her eyes steady. "No, this is leverage. The kind you taught me without realizing it. I've spent my whole life being your scapegoat, your punchline, your afterthought. Those days are over." The table was silent except for the faint clink of Ryan's trembling hands on the folder. Emily sat frozen, her lips pressed thin, her perfect little image cracking before my eyes. Hannah avoided my gaze entirely, and Mark, my so-called best man, shifted uncomfortably, realizing just how small he looked in the shadow of the man he thought he'd betrayed for good. I let the silence hang, heavy and suffocating. Then I stood, smoothing my jacket. "You all wanted me here tonight. You wanted me back in the family. Consider this my answer." And with that, I walked out, leaving the files on the table like a loaded weapon. They thought they had rewritten the story, but I had just taken the pen back. When I left Emily's house that night, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence behind me told me enough, that the cracks had split wide open, that for the first time in years, they were no longer in control of the story. The fallout came quickly. Ryan was the first of all. Within weeks, word spread through the industry about financial discrepancies in his company. He tried to spin it, calling it a misunderstanding, but the evidence was too clear. The IRS launched an investigation. Contracts evaporated overnight. By summer, his business had collapsed, and with it, Emily's perfect facade. She stopped posting photos of her lavish home, stopped boasting about her lifestyle. Rumors circulated that she was selling furniture just to keep up with the mortgage. Hannah wasn't far behind. Her employer caught wind of the expense reports. She was called into HR and, within days, escorted out of the building. The career she'd built, the one she'd weaponized against me by looking better, was over. The friends who once admired her vanished as quickly as her income. Mark tried to weather the storm, but living with Hannah became a battle he wasn't prepared for. Without her job, and with Ryan's connections gone, she unraveled. Arguments spilled into public. More than one mutual friend told me they'd seen her screaming at him in parking lots, accusing him of ruining her life. Eventually, he packed his bags and left. The man who had stood up at my wedding to expose me was now the one being shouted down in public, abandoned by the woman he thought he'd won. And my family? They fractured in ways I never thought possible. Emily blamed Ryan for everything, but she never forgave me for exposing him. My mother tried to play peacemaker at first, leaving long voicemails about how we should all come together in hard times, but her voice cracked under the weight of her own hypocrisy. She had chosen them over me, and now she was left with the wreckage. Even my father, silent, stoic, finally admitted one night in a voicemail I listened to twice, "You were right. We should have stood by you." But by then, it didn't matter. I no longer needed their validation. I had built my own life, my own strength, my own foundation. Months later, I walked past a cafe near my office and saw Hannah sitting alone. No Mark, no smile, just a hollow stare into her coffee. For a moment, she looked up and our eyes met. She flinched like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I just kept walking, the weight of her gaze following me until it faded into the crowd. That night, I poured a glass of wine in my condo, looking out at the skyline. For years, I had been their scapegoat, their punchline, the one they mocked and dismissed. They thought they had written me out of the story. But in the end, they had only written themselves into tragedy. And as I stood there, the city lights glowing beneath me, I whispered to myself the words I had waited years to say. They never saw me coming. So, I have to ask you, after hearing all this, what would you have done in my place? Would you have walked away forever, or would you have fought back to reclaim your narrative? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think.